virtual reality as a concept has honestly always intrigued me ever since I was a child. Because when the Virtual Boy first came into this world, I wasn't worried about how much it hurt my eyes. I was more thinking about the future of gaming because that was the beginning. And well, it was the beginning for me because I'm pretty sure that there have been other people that have had the thought of virtual reality long before I did, and obviously people have because, well, they created it. But the Virtual Boy was a cool concept to me because, sure, the games on it were pretty trivial and had no place in the virtual reality sphere, I guess you could say, because these were just basically regular games just with a fucking goggles that made it look 3D. And it hurt some people's eyes, like I said before. But after the Virtual Boy came out, I had actually heard of something called Dot Hack. This was something that was playing on Cartoon Network or Toonami. It was at nighttime, so I guess it would be Toonami. So it was a show that played on Toonami, and the whole premise of it was just basically virtual reality, just as a concept, you know? And that's honestly all I gleaned from it. I know that there was some concept of you die in the game, you die in real life, but I honestly didn't focus on that shit at all. What I focused on was the virtual reality aspect so I could fantasize about it, you know? Because it was rudimentary. It was basically just them in the world. There wasn't much inventory like Sword Art Online. There wasn't much UI, I should say, like user interface like Sword Art Online had. And if it did have a user interface that it showed to the audience, well, I honestly remember jack about it. Like I remember a minuscule user interface presence, if at all. But it was just cool to see like video game mechanics just shown off in such a way, you know, like people actually interacting with the world rather than just pressing a button. And well, that was just a cool concept to me, like just being able to do the thing rather than pressing a button to do the thing, you know? Sort of like how virtual reality is right now. Sure, it's rudimentary, like all you got to do is point the little thingy at whatever object you want to pick up and press a button and then you pick it up and then like you could use it like a sword, gun, shield, whatever. But you still have that device in your hand to pretty much emulate being in that world. But what Dot Hack showed was something more. Like, sure, what they showed in the real world was that they had the headsets on and they were using controllers to play the game. But in my mind, it was like how the anime showed it through the game's perspective, like a real world that people lived in, you know? Sort of honestly how like Sword Art Online portrayed it, but I wouldn't even like know about Sword Art Online until I was in high school, and that was a long time from when I was first introduced to the concept of virtual reality. So as time went on, I started building up on the ideas that, well, anime and TV had shown me. Because all that they ever showed with virtual reality is putting on a headset and then boom, you see the game and then you play with a controller or whatever. That always seemed boring to me. What I wanted was something where you could fully dive into the game so you could escape reality if you wanted to. Because my plan as a child was that if Pokemon ever had like a virtual reality game, I would go into it and I would stay in it for so long that my physical body dies. And I would be happy with that because I could like just live in the game forever, you know? That was so stupid because that's a horrible concept, you know? It's horrifying. But when more media started to represent virtual reality in the way that the way that I had envisioned it, I just got more hyped. Like you would have thought that I would have been turned away from it because first was The Last Book in the Universe. It's a book, a child's book, but it's pretty deep in my opinion. I actually went back to read it recently, and it was a good read. But the last book in the universe has this scene where the main characters are trying to get to the leader of, well, a gang, I'll call them. And this leader is locked up in his room, and they don't know how to get to this leader. And I believe that there's a hologram of this leader that's playing outside to instill fear in, like, whoever's, like, trying to trespass, you know? Or maybe it's just to represent him because it's like their statues or whatever. So there's this big statue or hologram of this really big buff dude, and this buff dude is the leader of this gang that our crew is trying to run away from. So eventually, our crew ends up breaking into the leader's throne room, and then they lock themselves in the throne room. And then basically, this room is desolate. It's in ruin pretty much because nobody's taking care of it in the past like 50 years or something like that. And basically, what happened is that the leader had dove into virtual reality, and it was basically the only thing keeping him alive because he had been in it for so long that his consciousness is living, and since his consciousness is there, it's forcing his body to stay alive, but his body does not have the nutrients to sustain itself. So as soon as they disconnect him from the virtual reality, he would die, and they sort of needed him to get out of that situation, but they couldn't take him out of virtual reality without killing him. And if the people saw him like that, they didn't know what the people would do because the people, the gang, I should say, would either go crazy and attack them or they could probably just turn on their leader. They honestly had no clue what would happen, but in the end, they had to pull the plug because while he was living in his fantasy world, he was honestly trapped. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. Like, now I understand how horrifying a concept that is. But at the time, I was like, hell yeah, dude, that's how I want to go out. Like, just living a fantasy life, you know? Just escaping reality. I just saw virtual reality as a form of escapism, just like any video game, you know? But then The Matrix came out, and we all know how The Matrix goes, but you would have thought that that would have, like, made me fear virtual reality because, like, hey, what if this reality we're living in right now is virtual reality? We would have no clue. We would honestly have no clue because this reality feels just as real as base reality if this is virtual reality. But at the time, I just thought it was a cool concept because, like, I was like, hey, you could literally download all that information into your psyche and then boom, all that information is now yours. Oh, so stupid. Like, sure, it built up on what I already envisioned for virtual reality, but at the same time, I should have seen the warnings that it held. Thank God I see them now. Because all I saw with that is that if you play a game that has, like, fighting in it, like, the game wouldn't just give you the abilities outright. You would have to practice in the game to get better at fighting so that your skills can improve. Just like real life, you know, it would have to be realistic. So what I envisioned is that while training in the video games to get better at the fighting skills to level up your character and shit like that, you would slowly develop those abilities in real life. Like, sure, you wouldn't gain any muscle mass, but the muscle memory would be there because your consciousness would have it imprinted on it somehow. I honestly don't know what I was thinking though, because that wouldn't work for everybody. It would probably only work for me and anybody else like me because I'm a visual learner. And so maybe visual learners would succeed with that, but I honestly have no clue because you're technically doing the thing, but at the same time, it is virtual reality, so it could be like you watching a video game character doing a thing, you know? So maybe it wouldn't translate one to one in real life, but if the game is programmed to be as close to reality as possible, I assumed it would be a possibility. And then for the most popular example, Sword Art Online. That was a headset deal, but that headset had the ability to transfer people's consciousness into the game. And that I vibed with. I didn't take any of the warnings about how it could kill you, dying in the game, you die in real life. I just saw how cool it was for like the advancement of technology, you know? So I just saw virtual reality as a form of escapism, and honestly, I just saw it as a tool. Like, it's just technology, and technology is a tool for humans to use. But now that I've gotten older, I don't fear virtual reality per se. I would probably use it if I didn't have the fears that I do. But honestly, if it is possible that we live in virtual reality currently, I would honestly want to die just so I could go to base reality eventually, you know? And even then, I wouldn't want to risk trapping my consciousness within virtual reality at all if this is base reality, if you get my drift. I just hope that this vibes with anybody that vibes with it. I This isn't to say virtual reality is bad. People will choose to do what they want to do, and if they want to live within virtual reality, I don't see any problem with that. In fact, it might be preferable because you could choose the reality that you want, and I could see some beauty in that. But at the same time, how I perceive it is a trap, basically. Like, if your consciousness is in the machine, who knows how time is affected by that machine? Because the way that we experience time right now is linear. But who's to say that once you dive into virtual reality that your perception of time doesn't change? What if your consciousness literally gets trapped in there? Like, what if your body dies, but your consciousness was in the game, so you're technically still alive in the game, and now you're basically trapped within that game, you know? There's just too many variables to take into account, and honestly, I just don't feel like it's worth risking it anymore. Like, as a kid, I just, I wished it would come to fruition. I wanted it to become reality, and now that it's so close to being reality, I just wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemies, honestly, because I could trick them into thinking that they're living reality, and they would be none the wiser, and they'd basically be in the palms of my hands, and it's just not right in my eyes. So, if I wouldn't wish something upon myself, I wouldn't wish it upon others, man. It's just too crazy a concept. If you want it, so be it. Just remember to stay safe out there.